Restaurant kicks out black woman and her daughter, and she returns as the owner of everything. Helen Sanders held her daughter Julia's hand firmly while trying to maintain her dignity in the face of curious glances from customers at the elegant Golden Palace restaurant. Her voice trembled, but she refused to lower her head as manager Victoria Parker pointed to the door with a smile of satisfaction on her lips. "Ma'am, you cannot afford this bill, and you even dared to bring your daughter to an establishment like this," said Victoria loudly, ensuring that everyone present could hear. "People like you are not welcome here." Julia, only 9 years old, clutched the stuffed animal she never let go of, her large eyes brimming with tears as she watched her mother being publicly humiliated. Helen was a chef with formal culinary training, with a specialization from France, and had saved for months to celebrate her daughter's birthday at this renowned New York City restaurant. "I already showed you my card and my reservation. I can definitely afford to pay," Helen responded, trying to keep her voice steady. "This card is probably stolen," Victoria shot back, raising her voice even more. "Security, please escort these people out." A burly man approached, grabbing Helen's arm with unnecessary force. Some people filmed the scene with their cell phones, while others looked away, embarrassed but silent. No one spoke up in their defense. Outside on the sidewalk, with a light rain falling on their faces, Helen looked into her daughter's eyes and then at the luxurious facade of the Golden Palace. An elderly lady who had also been removed from the restaurant approached and handed Helen a card. "I'm Mrs. Carol Oliver. I was also mistreated in there. If you want to talk, contact me," she said before getting into her car. Helen pocketed the card and hugged Julia tightly. "One day, sweetheart, we'll return here. Not as customers, but as owners of this place," she promised, not yet knowing how she would fulfill that promise. The next morning, Helen woke to her cell phone vibrating, non-stop. The video of her expulsion had gone viral on social media, exposing the veiled racism of the establishment. The images clearly showed the moment when Victoria refused her card without even running it through the machine and made comments about her appearance. While preparing breakfast in her small apartment on the east side of New York, Helen realized that Julia didn't want to go to school. The girl, normally cheerful and communicative, was withdrawn, clinging to her stuffed animal. "Mommy, will people laugh at me at school? Will they say we're poor and can't eat in nice places?" she asked, her voice breaking. Helen's heart shattered. How could she explain prejudice to a 9-year-old child? How could she tell her that, despite being a talented chef with international training, many doors closed to her because of the color of her skin? "No, my love. We're not poor and we can go wherever we want. That woman was very rude and unfair," she answered, hugging her daughter. "But we are strong, remember. As Grandma Sophie always said, the storm passes, but the willow tree remains, standing because it knows how to bend without breaking." Despite her words of comfort, Helen knew something had changed in Julia. The girl, who once dreamed of becoming a chef like her mother, now seemed afraid of the outside world. In the weeks that followed, she developed anxiety, refusing to go out in public and having frequent nightmares about the incident. Helen tried to contact the restaurant to demand a formal apology, but her calls were always ignored. Meanwhile, she needed to provide for her daughter. After the video went viral, she lost her job at the catering company where she worked. The owner feared negative association for his high society clients. That's when she remembered the card Mrs. Carroll had given her. When she called the number, she discovered that the lady was the widow of an important businessman and was outraged by the treatment they both received. "Come have tea with me, dear." "Bring your daughter. We need to talk," said Mrs. Carroll. The old mansion in the Upper East Side intimidated Helen at first glance. But upon entering, she found a welcoming environment with family photos and furniture that told stories. Mrs. Carroll received them with simplicity, serving chamomile tea and homemade donut holes that reminded Helen of her childhood. "I was furious about the treatment we received," commented Mrs. Carroll. "I've been going to that restaurant for decades, since the current owner's father ran it. But in recent years, since Richard Montgomery took over and hired that manager, the place has lost its soul." Helen observed Julia gradually relaxing, accepting the donut holes Mrs. Carroll offered, and even showing a smile when the lady showed her collection of porcelain miniatures. "You cook, don't you? I could tell by the way you were analyzing the dishes at the restaurant," continued Mrs. Carroll. "I'm a trained chef with a specialization from Paris," replied Helen. "Or at least I was, until I became unemployed after the incident." Mrs. Carroll's eyes sparkled. "I have a proposal for you. My friends at the club can't stand the food served at our weekly gatherings anymore. If you prepare some dishes for our next event, I can introduce you to influential people." Helen hesitated, but seeing Julia smiling for the first time in weeks, she accepted. It was an opportunity, and she needed to start over. In the weeks that followed, Helen transformed her small kitchen into a delivery service, preparing gourmet meals that she delivered by bicycle. The recipes, inherited from her grandma Sophie and refined during her studies in France, soon won a small but loyal clientele. The event at Mrs. Carroll's club was a success. Helen prepared deconstructed soul food, miniature Creole shrimp, and gourmet pecan pralines that impressed the guests. Among them was Paul Mitchell, a food critic who, upon learning her story, invited her to participate in a regional gastronomy festival. "Your talent is unquestionable, Helen. Don't let the prejudice of people like that restaurant manager dim your shine," said Paul. Life was beginning to improve, but Helen noticed that Julia was still suffering. The girl had been transferred to a new school, but had difficulty making friends and refused to participate in social events. The emotional scar from that day at the restaurant seemed too deep. One Sunday afternoon, while preparing orders in the kitchen, Helen received an unexpected visit. Ryan Cooper, the sous chef from the Golden Palace, was at her door, visibly nervous. "I needed to find you," he said. "I saw what happened that day and did nothing. I've carried that guilt with me ever since." Helen felt her stomach tighten at the memory, but invited him in. "Why are you here now?" she asked, suspicious. "Because I know you have talent. I've always admired your work when I saw your presentations at culinary events," confessed Ryan. "And because the restaurant is sinking after the scandal." Richard. "Montgomery is desperate but refuses to fire Victoria or issue an apology." The revelation surprised Helen. She hadn't imagined that the incident had affected the business so much. "That brings me no satisfaction," she replied honestly. "But what do you expect from me?" "Nothing," Ryan shook his head. "I came to offer my mentorship. I can teach you the Golden Palace's exclusive techniques as a form of reparation for my silence that day. And maybe one day you can open your own restaurant and show them how to treat people with dignity." The proposal was tempting. Helen thought of Julia, how she would like to build a secure future for her daughter and restore her confidence in the world. She accepted Ryan's offer, beginning a period of intensive learning that would transform her cooking and her life. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to our channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. 8 months passed. Helen now worked as a chef in a small cafe in downtown New York, where she gradually transformed the menu and won a loyal clientele. Her food, which blended French techniques with traditional American flavors, was praised by customers and local critics. Julia, inspired by her mother's persistence, was beginning to overcome her traumas. On weekends, she helped at the cafe, learning to prepare pastas and sauces. Helen watched with pride as her daughter gradually regained her joy and confidence. On a particularly busy Saturday morning, Helen was surprised by a visit from Mrs. Carroll, accompanied by an elegant woman she didn't know. "Helen, I'd like to introduce you to Lisa Vincent, an old friend and investor," said Mrs. Carroll with an enigmatic smile. Lisa extended her hand firmly. "I've heard a lot about you and your incredible food," she said. "I'd like to talk about a possible business partnership." After hours, the 3 women gathered at a secluded table. Julia was in the kitchen, learning to make gourmet chocolate truffles with Ryan, who had become a close friend of the family. "I'll get straight to the point," said Lisa, opening a folder of documents. "The Golden Palace is for sale. Richard, Montgomery is bankrupt after several lawsuits for discrimination and mismanagement. The price is well below market value." Helen felt a chill run down her spine. "And what does that have to do with me?" "I want to buy it," replied Lisa. and I want you to be the executive chef and partner in the venture." Silence took over the table. Helen felt her hands tremble and sought Mrs. Carroll's reassuring gaze. "Why?" was all she could ask. "Because I'm a businesswoman who recognizes talent," replied Lisa, "and because I was there that day. I was one of the people who looked away, and that has haunted me ever since." The proposal was surreal. Return to that place that had caused so much suffering to her and Julia, work in the same kitchens from which she was expelled. Helen didn't know if she was ready for that. "I need to think," she said finally, "and mainly I need to talk to my daughter." That night, while Julia was drawing at the kitchen table, Helen told her about Lisa's proposal. To her surprise, her daughter's eyes shone with excitement. "Can we really be owners of the restaurant that kicked us out, Mum? Like you promised that day?" she asked, animated for the first time in a long time. "We wouldn't exactly be owners. Ju, we would be partners," explained Helen. Julia seemed thoughtful for a moment, then smiled. "Grandma Sophie always said we should transform bad places into good ones, right? Maybe we can do that with the restaurant." Her daughter's simple wisdom touched Helen deeply. Perhaps this was the path to true healing, not running from the past, but transforming it. The next day, Helen accepted Lisa's proposal, with one condition. She would have total freedom to revamp the menu and the team. She wanted to create an inclusive environment where people from all backgrounds would feel welcome. The news of the sale of the Golden Palace spread quickly. Victoria Parker, upon discovering that Helen would be the new executive chef, tried to mobilize the former employees against the change. Some joined her. Others, tired of the toxic environment, decided to give the new management a chance. Richard Montgomery, the former owner, showed surprise when he met Helen at the contract signing. "You?" he asked, his face pale with recognition. "You'll need more than luck to make this restaurant work again." Helen held his gaze. "I don't need luck, Mr. Montgomery. I just need what I already have: talent, determination, and humanity." During the restaurant renovation, Helen and Julia explored every corner of the place. In the basement, among dusty boxes, they found an old recipe book with handwritten notes. To their surprise, they discovered that many of the original recipes of the Golden Palace had been appropriated from black cooks who had worked there decades ago, including a dessert that Helen recognized as a creation by her grandma Sophie, who had worked as a cook for wealthy New York families. This discovery further strengthened her determination. It wasn't just about a new beginning, but a historical reclamation, a poetic justice. 2 weeks before reopening, Helen faced a new obstacle. Victoria, now working for a competing restaurant, was spreading rumors about her competence and trying to convince suppliers not to serve the new Golden Palace. The local community, however, took Helen's side. Small producers, many from marginalized communities who had never been able to supply high-end restaurants, offered quality ingredients. On the morning of the grand reopening, Helen woke before sunrise. Sitting on the balcony of her new apartment, acquired with the advance she had received as a partner, she watched the sky change colors while thinking about her journey to this point. "Can't sleep?" asked Julia, appearing beside her in pajamas. "Just thinking, sweetheart," she replied, hugging the girl. "Are you nervous about today?" Julia shook her head. "We're going to show everyone how to do things the right way, aren't we?" Helen smiled, proud of the strength her daughter had developed. Together, they would face whatever was to come. The new Golden Palace, now renamed Roots, opened its doors at 7 p.m. sharp. The line wrapped around the block. Critics, influencers, and curious onlookers waited to see the transformation led by the chef who had once been humiliatingly expelled from there. The decor had been completely redesigned, exchanging former ostentatious luxury for cozy elegance. Photographs of American chefs from diverse ethnic backgrounds decorated the walls, telling stories of resistance through gastronomy. Helen was circulating among the tables, greeting customers, when Lisa discreetly called her over. "Someone wants to speak with you," she said, pointing to a table in the corner. Helen felt her stomach sink when she recognized Victoria Parker, sitting alone with a serious expression. "What is she doing here?" asked Helen, feeling her heart race. "She made a reservation like any customer." "We can't refuse her. It would contradict everything we stand for, don't you think?" replied Lisa. Helen took a deep breath and walked to the table. This was her final test. How would she react face to face with the woman who had humiliated her? "Good evening, welcome to Roots," said Helen, keeping her voice steady. "How can I help you?" Victoria seemed uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. "I came to see what everyone is talking about," she answered dryly. "I didn't expect to be served by the owner." "Executive chef and partner," Helen corrected. "Here, all customers receive special attention regardless of who they are." A tense silence settled between them. Finally, Victoria spoke. "I must admit I'm surprised by what you've accomplished. I didn't expect it." It wasn't an apology, but Helen didn't need that to move forward. Her success spoke louder than any words. "I'll recommend a special dish for you," said Helen. "It's a reinterpretation of a recipe created by my grandma Sophie, who worked as an anonymous cook for decades. I hope you enjoy not just the flavor, but the history it carries." When Helen returned to the kitchen, she found Julia helping Ryan finish the desserts. The girl smiled when she saw her mother. "Everything okay, Mom?" Helen hugged her daughter. "Everything's great, my love. We're exactly where we should be." Roots was a resounding success. In the months that followed, it became one of the most sought-after restaurants in New York, with reservations booked weeks in advance. Helen implemented a training program for young cooks from underprivileged communities, offering opportunities that she herself didn't have at the beginning of her career. Julia grew up secure and confident, helping in the kitchen on weekends and dreaming of one day taking over the family business. The trauma of that rainy Sunday had transformed into strength and determination. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to our channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out. Now continuing. On a Sunday afternoon, exactly 2 years after the incident that changed their lives, Helen was preparing a special lunch at Roots. The restaurant was closed to the public, hosting only guests for an intimate celebration. Mrs. Carol, now 83 years old, watched proudly as Julia, now 11, helped serve the guests. The girl had become a small celebrity among regular customers, charming everyone with her precocious knowledge about gastronomy. Lisa raised her glass for a toast. To Helen Sanders, who taught us that true excellence isn't just in the food we serve, but in the dignity with which we treat people. Everyone applauded. Helen, moved, thanked them. Her life had changed completely. From an unemployed and humiliated chef to a successful businesswoman, she had come a long way. Among the guests was Robert, a renowned chef who had briefly worked at the former Golden Palace. After lunch, he approached Helen with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something I discovered recently," he said, handing her a yellowed envelope. "I found these documents when I was organizing my things. I think you should see them." Intrigued, Helen opened the envelope. Inside were old restaurant documents dated 1978, showing that the land where the establishment was built had been fraudulently acquired from the family of a black cook, her grandmother, Sophie. "How is this possible?" asked Helen, shocked. "Your grandfather had bought this land with his life savings," explained Robert, "but after his death, documents were falsified and the property was taken. Your grandmother never had the means to fight it in court." The revelation deeply shook Helen. Fate had drawn a perfect circle, bringing her back to the place that by right should have belonged to her family. In the weeks that followed, Helen consulted lawyers to understand her options. She didn't want to enter into a legal battle with Richard Montgomery, the former owner, who was already facing financial difficulties. Instead, she proposed a solution that surprised everyone. "I want to transform part of the restaurant into a cultural center that tells the story of Black American cooks," she explained to Lisa and Mrs. Carroll. "A space that honors women like my grandmother, who contributed to American gastronomy without ever receiving due recognition." The idea was enthusiastically received. The project, named Taste Memories, would occupy the second floor of the building, with exhibitions, workshops, and a small museum dedicated to African American influence in American cuisine. During the preparation of the space, Helen found more documents and photographs revealing the rich history of the location. She discovered that, before becoming a luxury restaurant, the building had housed a traditional church and community center. led by her great-grandmother, Mother Justine. The inauguration of the Cultural Center coincided with the launch of Helen's first book, Roots, Recipes and Stories of Resistance. The work, which blended gastronomy and family memories, became a bestseller, translated into several languages. Julia, now 12 years old, had found her own voice. At school, she gave talks about healthy eating and cultural awareness. At home, she experimented with creating her own recipes, combining tradition and innovation. On a sunny morning, Helen received an unexpected visit at the restaurant. Victoria Parker, the former manager who had humiliated her, was at the door, visibly nervous. "May I speak with you?" she asked, her voice low. Helen led her to a table in the back garden where she served coffee and fresh cheese biscuits. "I'm moving abroad," explained Victoria. "But before I go, I needed to say something I should have said a long time ago. I apologize for what I did to you and your daughter. There's no justification for my behavior." Helen observed the woman before her. She was no longer the intimidating figure who occupied her nightmares. She was just a lost person, carrying the weight of her mistakes. "Thank you for your words," replied Helen. "I can't say I didn't suffer, because that would be a lie. But that day, as painful as it was, brought me here. In a way, I should thank you." Victoria seemed surprised by the response. "How can you be so balanced?" Helen smiled. "My grandmother used to say that bitterness is like a dish that only gets more sour the longer it sits on the table. I prefer to serve and eat sweet things." After Victoria's departure, Helen found Julia in the kitchen, preparing dough for a new type of ravioli she had invented. "Who was that woman, Mom?" asked the girl. "She seemed familiar to me." Helen hesitated, but decided that her daughter deserved to know the truth. "She was the manager who kicked us out of the restaurant, remember?" Julia stopped what she was doing, thoughtful. "I remember. I was so scared that day." After a pause, she continued, "But now she can't hurt us anymore, right? We are strong." Helen hugged her daughter, moved by her wisdom. "Yes, my love, we are very strong." Roots continued to thrive. Helen expanded the business, opening a popular cooking school that offered scholarships to young talents from peripheral communities. Her work was recognized internationally, earning her invitations to lectures and TV shows. During one of these trips, she met Jack Peterson, a family farmer who supplied organic ingredients to restaurants. The professional meeting soon turned into friendship and eventually into a romantic relationship. Jack, a widower and father of a 10-year-old boy, Samuel, shared Helen's values of family and work. Gradually, he became a constant presence in the restaurant and in Helen and Julia's lives. "He makes you smile more, Mom," observed Julia, after a Sunday when the four of them had spent the day at the beach. Helen couldn't deny it. The arrival of Jack and Samuel had brought a new dimension of happiness to her life. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to think of a future that included not only professional success, but also love and companionship. The marriage proposal came in a simple and moving way. During a dinner prepared by Julia and Samuel, Jack handed Helen a carved wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, intrigued. "Open it and find out," he replied, with a nervous smile. Inside, the box was a small handmade book with photos and texts that told the story of the last 2 years they had shared. On the last page, a simple question: "Do you want to build the rest of our story together?" Helen looked at Julia, who was watching the scene with bright eyes. "Did you know about this?" she asked her daughter. "Of course I did," replied Julia, laughing. "Samuel and I helped make the book, and I told Uncle Jack you would say yes." Helen smiled, moved by the complicity between her daughter and those who had entered their lives. "Well, I guess I have no choice," she joked, turning to Jack. "Yes, I want to build our story together." The ceremony was held in the Garden of Roots, with friends, family, and restaurant staff in attendance. Mrs. Carroll, at 84, insisted on being the matron of honor, supported by her cane, specially decorated for the occasion. "I knew you were perfect for each other from the first time I saw you together," commented the elderly woman with tearful eyes. "This makes me believe that, no matter the age, there's always room for new beginnings." After the ceremony, during the reception that Helen insisted on preparing personally with her team, Julia asked to speak. The girl, now 13 years old, climbed onto the small stage with surprising confidence for her age. "When I was 9 years old, I thought the world was a scary place," she began. "I went through situations that made me afraid to leave home, to trust people. But my mom taught me that we can transform bad places and situations into something beautiful." Helen wiped away a discreet tear, moved by her daughter's words. "Today, I have not only an amazing mom, but also a dad and a brother," continued Julia, looking at Jack and Samuel. "And I've learned that families are like the best recipes. It doesn't matter where the ingredients come from. What matters is the love with which they're combined." The applause was warm. Jack hugged Helen, whispering in her ear, "She's extraordinary, just like her mother." Life took its course. The Roots restaurant became a reference point in New York, not only for gastronomic excellence, but for its social and cultural role. Helen and Jack expanded the business, creating a network of family farming suppliers and encouraging sustainable practices. Julia, now a culinary student, was beginning to develop her own cooking style, blending techniques learned from her mother and contemporary influences. Samuel, interested in agronomy, spent weekends visiting the restaurant's partner producers, learning about organic farming. On a spring morning, 5 years after the humiliation at the former Golden Palace, Helen received an envelope containing an invitation to participate as a judge in an important national culinary competition. It was the definitive recognition of her place in the American gastronomic scene. "See, Mom? From ashes to stars," commented Julia proudly. Helen smiled, thinking of her grandma Sophie and all the women who came before her, opening invisible paths so that one day she could be there. She also thought about the frightened girl Julia had been and the confident young woman she was now becoming. "No, sweetheart. From roots to stars," she gently corrected. "We were never reduced to ashes. We always had our roots firmly planted, even when the storm seemed too strong." That night, Roots was packed as always. Helen circulated among the tables, exchanging words with customers, many of whom had become friends over the years. As she passed table 15, where a mother and daughter were celebrating a birthday, she paused for a moment. "Is everything to your liking?" she asked kindly. The woman smiled emotionally. "Perfect. I saved all year to bring my daughter here for her birthday. She dreams of being a chef like you." Helen looked at the girl who was watching her with admiration. She remembered herself years ago, saving to take Julia to celebrate her birthday at a luxury restaurant. "What's your name?" she asked the girl. "Sophie," she replied shyly. "Like your grandmother, I read about her in your book." Helen felt a lump in her throat. Life really had mysterious ways of closing circles. "After dinner, would you like to see our kitchen, Sophie? See how a restaurant works from the inside?" The girl's eyes lit up with excitement. "Can I really?" Helen nodded. "Of course you can. Here the doors are always open for those who have dreams." Returning to the kitchen, Helen found Julia finalizing a new dish she had created under Jack's watchful eye. "One day when you were little, I promised we would return to that restaurant not as customers, but as owners," Helen said to her daughter. "Remember," Julia smiled. "I remember. And you kept your promise. More than that, you transformed the promise into something much bigger than we could have imagined." Helen hugged her daughter, thinking of all the challenges they had faced together. From public humiliation to recognized success, from insecurity to confidence, from fear to the courage to rebuild their lives on stronger foundations. "You know what Grandma Sophie would say now?" asked Julia. "What?" "That when God closes a door, He doesn't want us to keep staring at the lock, but to build our own house." Helen laughed, recognizing her grandmother's wisdom in her daughter's words. Indeed, they had built much more than a restaurant or a business. They had built a legacy of dignity, resilience, and generosity. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to our channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. 5 years passed since that conversation in the kitchen. Roots had expanded to 3 locations in different cities across America, each maintaining Helen's original philosophy: quality food served with dignity and respect. Julia, now 19, had just returned from an internship at a renowned restaurant in Paris. Her confidence and talent impressed everyone, and Helen couldn't be prouder of the young woman her daughter had become. At the welcome party organized to celebrate Julia's return, Helen observed her daughter from a distance, animatedly talking with guests about her experiences in Europe. There was a grace and confidence in her movements that drastically contrasted with the frightened girl from years ago. "She's amazing, isn't she?" commented Jack, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. "She is," replied Helen, accepting the drink. "Sometimes I wonder how she managed to overcome all of that and transform into this wonderful person." Jack smiled. "Maybe because she had you as an example." Across the room, Mrs. Carroll, now 89, was seated in a comfortable armchair, surrounded by younger guests who listened attentively to her stories. The friendship between her and Helen had strengthened over the years, transforming into an almost maternal relationship. In the middle of the celebration, Julia requested everyone's attention with a clink on her glass. "I have an announcement to make," she said, her eyes shining with emotion. "During my stay in Paris, I developed a project that I presented to some investors, and today I received confirmation that it was approved." A murmur of curiosity ran through the room. "I'm going to open my own restaurant," continued Julia, "but it won't be an ordinary restaurant. It will be a space dedicated to the professional training of young cooks from underprivileged communities, especially girls who dream of a career in gastronomy but face obstacles because of their background or color." Helen felt her heart overflow with pride. Her daughter had not only overcome the traumas of the past, but was transforming that experience into something positive for others. "The restaurant will be called Seeds," explained Julia, "because I believe we all have the potential to grow and flourish as long as we're planted in fertile soil and receive the necessary care." The applause was warm. Helen couldn't hold back tears as she hugged her daughter. "You know you have all my support, don't you?" she whispered in her ear. "I know, Mom," replied Julia. "Actually, I was hoping you would agree to be a consultant on the project. Nobody understands more about starting from scratch and building something meaningful than you." In the months that followed, Helen divided her time between managing her restaurant chain and supporting Julia's project. Seeds was built in a revitalized area of the New York outskirts, bringing employment and training opportunities to the local community. The inauguration was an exciting event. Julia had invited renowned chefs from across the country to collaborate on the opening menu, each contributing a special dish. The press extensively covered the event, highlighting the story of overcoming behind the new venture. Among the special guests was a surprise that Helen had secretly prepared for her daughter, Sophie, the girl who years ago had visited Roots dreaming of becoming a chef. Now 14 years old, she would be the first student in the Seeds training program. When Julia saw the shy teenager approaching, she recognized her immediately. "Sophie? Is that really you?" she asked, moved. The girl nodded, nervous. "Your mother invited me. She said there might be a place for me here." Julia looked at Helen, who was watching the scene from a distance with a smile on her lips. "My mother has a special talent for recognizing potential in people," said Julia, hugging the young woman. "And if she says you have what it takes, then I completely believe her. Welcome to Seeds, Sophie." That night marked the beginning of a new phase in Helen's life. Seeing her daughter follow in her footsteps with such determination and social awareness, she felt that the circle was complete. From the frightened girl who doubted her worth to the confident young entrepreneur who extended a hand to others, Julia represented everything Helen had dreamed for the future. Time passed, and the Sanders family's culinary empire continued to prosper and expand. Helen, now a respected figure in the national culinary scene, increasingly dedicated herself to social causes, using her visibility to advocate for inclusion policies and combat racism. On a sunny afternoon, while Helen and Jack were enjoying a rare moment of tranquility in their home garden, the phone rang. It was Lisa, her partner since the early days of Roots. "Helen, you won't believe it," said Lisa, her voice filled with emotion. "I just received a call from the International Gastronomy Association. You're among the finalists for the Humanitarian Chef of the Year award." The news caught Helen by surprise. The award was one of the highest honors in world gastronomy, recognizing chefs who used their work to positively transform their communities. "But I didn't enter any competition," she responded, confused. "I know," laughed Lisa. "It was Julia who entered you. She compiled your entire journey, from the incident at the Golden Palace until today, documenting the social impact of your projects." Helen felt a wave of emotion. Her daughter, who had witnessed her moment of greatest humiliation, was now presenting her to the world as an example of overcoming and humanity. The award ceremony would be held in New York the following month. The entire family traveled for the event. Helen and Jack, Julia and her boyfriend Peter, Samuel and his fiancée Fiona, as well as Mrs. Carroll, who, at 90, insisted on being present. For this historic moment, on the night of the award ceremony, seated among the biggest names in world gastronomy, Helen couldn't help but think of the long road traveled. From the small kitchen where she prepared meals that she delivered by bicycle to the stage of that prestigious event, her journey had been marked by challenges, but also by transformative encounters and unexpected opportunities. When her name was announced as the winner, Helen took the stage to warm applause. With a voice filled with emotion, she shared her story, not omitting the difficult moments but emphasizing the lessons learned and the people who helped her transform adversity into strength. "Gastronomy for me has never been just about food," she told the attentive audience. "It's about dignity. It's about creating spaces where everyone is welcome and respected. It's about preserving stories that might be forgotten and opening doors for those who come after us." At the end of her speech, she made a gesture that surprised everyone, inviting Julia to join her on stage. "This is my daughter," she introduced with pride, "the girl who stood by my side at the most difficult moment of my life and who now leads her own path. If I'm here today, it's because she gave me the strength to never give up." Mother and daughter embraced, moved to the audience's applause. It was a moment of consecration, not just professionally, but humanly. The recognition that true greatness isn't in never falling, but in how we rise and who we help rise alongside us. Back in the United States, life resumed its normal rhythm. The international award opened new doors for Helen, who began to be invited to conferences and events around the world. Julia, meanwhile, continued expanding Seeds, which had already graduated its first class of young cooks, all employed in prestigious restaurants. On an autumn morning, while Helen and Julia were participating in an organic producers fair to select ingredients for their restaurants, they were approached by an elderly lady who seemed emotional to see them. "You're Helen and Julia Sanders, aren't you?" asked the lady with teary eyes. They confirmed, intrigued by the stranger's emotion. "My name is Bernice," she introduced herself. "I was at the Golden Palace that day, 10 years ago, when you were—" She hesitated, searching for an appropriate word. "Treated so unfairly." Helen felt a slight discomfort. That episode, although transformative in her life, still brought painful memories. "I was there and did nothing," continued Bernice, her voice breaking. "I just watched, too shocked to react, and that has haunted me for years. When I saw you on television, receiving that international award, I finally found the courage to seek you out and ask forgiveness for my silence." Julia, now a young woman of 24, stepped forward and took the lady's hands in hers. "There's nothing to forgive," she said with gentleness. "That moment was difficult for everyone present. What's important is that we're here now, building something positive." The lady wiped away a tear. "I can't change the past, but I'd like to contribute to the future. I read about the Seeds project and would like to make a donation to the scholarship fund." That unexpected encounter touched Helen deeply. It was yet another proof of how stories of overcoming had the power to inspire and transform, creating waves of impact that extended far beyond the immediate circle. That night, at an intimate dinner that gathered the most important people in her life, Helen proposed a toast. "To the journey," she said, raising her glass, "with all its curves, obstacles, and surprises. Without that rainy Sunday 10 years, how perhaps we wouldn't all be here, united and strengthened by our shared experiences." Julia completed the toast. "And to those who teach us, even without knowing, that we are capable of transforming pain into purpose and rejection into embrace. Mrs. Carroll, now approaching 91, smiled with wisdom. "I knew from the first day that you two were special," she commented. "There are people who let themselves be defeated by circumstances, and there are those, like you, who use the stones in their path to build castles." Helen observed the faces around the table. Jack, her loyal companion; Samuel, who had become a young agronomist dedicated to sustainable agriculture; Lisa, friend and partner who had believed in her potential; Ryan, the chef who had the courage to recognize his mistakes and offer help; and Julia, her daughter, her pride, her greatest legacy. 10 years ago, expelled from a restaurant with humiliating accusations, she could never have imagined that would be the beginning, not the end of her story. That the promise made to her daughter on the sidewalk, under the light rain, would be fulfilled in such broad and meaningful ways. The restaurant that had once rejected her was just the first step on a journey that had taken her far beyond the dreams she had dared to dream. Because, as she had learned from her grandma Sophie, life rarely moves in a straight line, but its detours often lead us to more beautiful destinations than planned. Seated at the head of that table, surrounded by love and admiration, Helen Sanders knew that her story was not one of revenge or retaliation, but of transformation and healing. She had not only reclaimed her dignity, but created spaces where others could find theirs. She had not simply become the owner of a restaurant, but built a legacy of inclusion and respect that spanned generations. And that, she realized with clarity, was worth much more than all the stars and awards in the world. End of story. If this story of overcoming touched your heart, share your own transformation experience in the comments. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more moving stories that show how we can flourish in adversity.